Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. This video is about the presentation I gave at the International Conference on Ecolinguistics, the area I did my PhD research in. A number of people asked me if I could make a video with this presentation and put it out there so it could be shared with those who didn't get a chance to attend the conference or those who would like to see this presentation again. I thought it was a great idea, so here it is, the talk I gave at the Conference on Ecolinguistics 2021. Let me just share the slides with you first and we will start. All right. So my name is Alina Zhdanova, and though originally I'm from Belarus, for the past 4 years I've been living in Malaysia. I have just completed my PhD at the University of Malaya in Kuala Lumpur, where my research encompassed two major areas, ecolinguistics and veganism. The topic of my presentation at this conference is human-non-human animal dichotomy, towards a harmonious relationship between human and non-human animals. Today, I'm presenting on what actually motivated this research, human-non-human animal dichotomy, what lies at the basis of it, and how ecolinguistics can help move from this dichotomy to the harmonious, free from harm and exploitation relationship between humans and other animals. So, how do we understand a human-non-human animal dichotomy? It is, in other words, a notion, division, or contrast, if you will, between human and non-human animals, where humans are seen as different and or superior. Boundaries are created to distinguish between human and non-human animals. This eventually brings up an anthropocentric position, a notion of human centrality, which leads to speciesism. Some animals matter, others don't. It also leads to objectifying, exploiting, and destroying non-human animals, which in turn has a heavy impact on the environment. We don't really think that animal agriculture, such as meat, dairy, egg industries, largely contribute to greenhouse gas emissions and eventually to the global warming we have already been experiencing for a while, right? But animal agriculture is also linked to land, water pollution, as well as deforestation. As you can see, these impacts from speciesism to environmental destruction are anything but making this planet a happy, harmonious, and abundant place to be. So how and why did this human-non-human animal dichotomy emerge? A big factor here is culture, tradition, of course. This is how we've always been and what we've always eaten. Education and lack of education for this matter. Habit and not being aware. And this is where I'd like to focus on in this presentation. We are often not even aware that this dichotomy is provoked, driven, and reinforced by the very language we read, hear, and speak. How? Here are a few examples. It is quite normal and grammatically correct to use it referring to non-human animals instead of gendered pronouns, and that's in the English language. Next, the separation in terminology between human and non-human animals is so common. For example, people and animals. For human children, we say a boy, a girl, a baby, while for non-human beings, for non-human babies, we have certain terms, calves, kittens, cubs. We are so accustomed to this terminology that we don't realize how it strengthens the idea of separation between us. Some other examples of typical terminology that reinforces the dichotomic view are euphemisms instead of like beef instead of cow's flesh, or functionalization, egg layer. Another example is metonymy, broiler, poultry. And interestingly, if the word for the non-human animal is used when we talk about food, then it often becomes a mass noun, uncountable, like I eat chicken, I eat duck, instead of I eat chickens and ducks. Agency is not considered either. Non-human animals are not seen as agents in their lives capable to carry out different activities. And these are just a few examples out of all language patterns related to non-human animals. Now, some of the authors who wrote and write about a human-non-human animal dichotomy are mentioned right here. So that's in terms of the linguistic peculiarities, but dichotomy is reinforced by the images we see as well. For example, non-human animals are rather not realistic. For example, speaking animals in ads, or animation that makes non-human animals look like humans, but designed not to be taken seriously. Meat, which has no visual connection with the real source. The real source, the living being who was killed. Such language and image practices do bring harm because language does not simply describe the world, it describes the world in particular ways. So, to the point that it constructs the worldviews. In other words, language does not correspond, it construes. And what we see here is the worldview that non human animals are not worthy. They are commodities. They don't count, they don't have feelings, basically, they don't matter. So, why talk about human-non-human dichotomy at this conference? How's ecolinguistics involved here? At the International Conference on Ecolinguistics 4 in 2019, Professor Aaron Stebe spoke about eco-civilization and Anthropocene ecology, where he particularly highlighted that language is part of ecosystems because it influences the survival and thriving of life, because it helps determine who eats who, because it helps determine how much we consume, and how much we value other species and the environment. So, taking this power of language into consideration, ecolinguistics is particularly applicable here because it explores the role of language in life sustaining interactions of humans, other species, and the physical environment. Ecolinguistics also works towards building an eco civilization by questioning the stories of industrial civilization and contributing to the search of new stories. Now, the stories of our industrial civilization with regard to non-human animals are that animals are not worthy, animals are different from humans, therefore do not deserve the same treatment, animals are victims, and other not beneficial to non-human animal stories. So these various stories are resulted from the existing dichotomy. So how to minimize the existing dichotomy? How do we increase the harmonious and free from speciesism relationship? One of the powerful ways is to look into the language, search for beneficial to non-human animal stories, and promote them. And this is where ecolinguistic approach comes into play. By incorporating the ecosophy, which I will mention a bit later, search for the beneficial stories. Then what is considered to be a beneficial story with regard to non-human animals? There could be different stories, but those would be the stories where non-human animals are seen as sentient living beings. They are individual living beings and not commodities. They're equal in their capacity to live their own lives. They have the right to live and experience life. So there could be other stories as well, of course, but the bottom line is that they are not damaging to non-human animals. Instead, our fellow animals emerge as individuals, as living beings who, just like other species, deserve to live their lives. So in my research, vegan campaigns were considered to be one of potential sources of beneficial stories. There were selected three major campaigns: Be Fair, Be Vegan, Go Vegan World, Veganuary. And then to identify beneficial stories, the concepts of multimodal approach, stories, and ecosophy were applied. So in terms of a multimodal analysis, I analyzed the linguistic and visual features of the campaigns where I applied a social actor and action framework for language. And for image analysis, I applied grammar visual design by Kress and van Leuven. Now, I'm not going to focus on the details of these frameworks, but you're welcome to pause and look a little bit more carefully. Now, I further considered the concept of stories by Steve Bain. There are 9 stories. Again, I'm not going to go into the definition of each story, but those stories are ideology, framing, metaphors, evaluation, identity, conviction, erasure, salience, and narratives. And once these stories were identified based on the language and image analysis, we placed them against the ecosophy. So, ecosophy, what does it stand for? Ecosophy represents a philosophy of ecological harmony, and it comprises of norms as well as value priority announcements. Each ecolinguist elaborates his or her own ecosophy by relying as well on different schools of thought. And the ecosophy in my research, I named Vicosophy, or short for vegan ecosophy. It operates on the basic principle of awareness and consists of the following values: life, respect, morality, equality, compassion, freedom, sustainability. As a result of this research, it was identified what linguistic and visual features are the running ones throughout the campaigns, what stories they create, and by comparing the stories with the ecosophy of the research, the beneficial stories were identified. Right, let's look at some of the linguistic features that were identified throughout the campaigns. I'm not presenting the whole range of the language patterns here, but some of the major ones are in this table. Individualization, specification, personalization when we talk about non-human animals. Some examples are he, she, mother, someone, not something. Determination, babies, mothers, children. Non-human animals are represented as sensors and sayers. They feel, they grieve. Doers of actions, they play, they raise their children. Non-human animals are activated in language. There are no euphemisms. The reality of what's happening to our fellow animals is not sugar-coated. Adjectives that are used to describe non-human animals, such as brave, cautious, curious, mindful. Comparison, like us, like we do. Opposition, friend versus fabric, where the focus is on the living being. Prejudice is learned, unlearned speciesism. The reader's conviction is tested here. And the reader is often addressed as well. For example, which chick should die for your omelet? Attention here is brought to the living being. Plus, there is the invitation to consider the reader's convictions and beliefs. Information on the environmental impact is given as well, is often presented here. So what about the image features? Now, narrative representation is quite common, such as the one over here. In this example, we can see a mother and baby bond and love, which tells us a narrative of the birth of a child, nurturing the child needs his mother and her protection. The same story, the same narrative we tell about humans. Conceptual representations, such as the one here, where a non-human animal is looking at the viewer, no action involved, which gives an opportunity as well for scrutinizing the carrier and seeing their true value. You can trace the affection and feelings in these images, high visual salience, demand, where you can see the eye contact, offer, no eye contact. But in this situation, the viewer has more chance to contemplate on the depicted circumstances. Horizontal angle, so that there is no difference in power between the viewer and the represented living being. Close, medium, close shots, high modality, foregrounding. All these linguistic and visual features have a tremendous impact on how we look at our fellow animals, that they're not just some unworthy things that should be exploited by humans. They are sentient, they're living, they're here on this planet, not for us, but with us. So these linguistic and visual features together shaped the following three major stories. The first one is salience. And throughout the campaigns, these are the messages. Non-human animals are living beings who have feelings, wants, and needs. Non-human animals are sentient beings with their own lives. And some of the language and image characteristics I mentioned earlier, you can observe in these posters as well. The second story is conviction. Non-human animals are similar to humans in their feelings, wants, and needs. Speciesism is wrong. People's beliefs about animal products are wrong. Each poster of the campaigns contains certain linguistic and visual features that contribute to creating these stories. And finally, the third story, ideology, where all life is important. Non-human animals are individuals, and this is the ideology of biocentrism. Veganism is good for the planet. These are the running messages throughout the campaigns. And again, the language and image are what creates these stories. So after putting these stories against the ecosophy of my research, I could see how they reflected the main values of this ecosophy, such as life, respect, morality, equality, compassion, freedom, as well as sustainability. So are these stories beneficial? Should we adopt them? Should we promote them? Yes. As you can see from the Vicosophy perspective, these stories are largely beneficial to our fellow animals. So how can we learn from these stories? If we want to decrease and subsequently erase the human-non-human dichotomy, we need to be cautious of linguistic and visual representation of non-human animals as we speak, write, and portray them in images. So, for example, when talking about a cow and her baby, instead of saying it feeds its calf, we can say she feeds her baby. And this is in terms of the English language again. Instead of saying beef contains a lot of saturated fat, we can say cow's flesh contains a lot of saturated fat. These kind of language patterns bring our attention to non-human animals as living beings with their own lives and not just some commodities. And it's not just about campaigns. It's about any discourse we engage in where non-human animals are involved. Certainly, there can be more research done into how effective these stories may be. But we are not in the position to wait for something big to happen that will push us to the change. Not these days. It comes down to each individual. A small action, such as using the language with more awareness, can trigger awareness in others. But if nothing changes, nothing will change. Being aware of the language we use, as well as images we create, contributes so much to creating the world we want to see. Because when we stop looking at our fellow animals as commodities, but instead acknowledge that they are here with us to live and experience life, it is quite possible that we will start moving away from exploiting them and towards adopting more harmonious practices that do not take lives of other animals and become more sustainable with regard to our planet. So let's do our part and our best to make this world a better place where every living being is important and deserves to live and experience their lives to the fullest. On this note, I'm ending my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it gave you some interesting insights as well as an idea of the role ecolinguistics can play in a number of areas, in particular related to human and non-human animals. Thank you very much again. Here's my email. Feel free to get in touch with me. And I'm wishing you all the best and goodbye.